Welcome to you all. Professor Sir Mark Walport first. How tough does the Prime Minister need to be tomorrow when he announces new restrictions? Does the closure of pubs at 10 p.m. in England cut it, for example?
Well, I mean, the short answer is that we have got to increase the spacing between people in order to reduce the transmission of this infection. The numbers speak for themselves. They are increasing, doubling roughly every 7 days or so. And as Patrick Vallance said earlier, that takes you from 3,100 in 15th of September to nearly 50,000 a month later. And if it keeps going up at that rate, it goes 50,000, 100,000 to 200,000. So now there are a variety of measures that can be taken to socially distance us. And that's everything from working from home wherever we can, reducing contacts between households, all the way through to things like closing entertainment and pubs and things like that. And I think this is the big challenge, which is the balance between preserving lives and then preserving livelihoods, the economy and education. And I think that everyone agrees that education is absolutely critical. And so we've got to keep schools open as far as we possibly can.
Well, so let me bring in... OK, let me bring in Lord Bilimoria here. Some kind of national lockdown to some degree is coming, and that's just the fact of preserving lives, and livelihoods have got to come second.
We have seen over the last 6 months how this country has pulled together when it's come to a lockdown. 23rd of March, I remember the date so clearly, for 3.5 months, many sectors like my business, with Cobra Beer supplying thousands of restaurants, they were just shut. No business for 3.5 months. And then in July, 4th of July, we're allowed to open up again, gradually opening up. And the government has been very supportive with all the measures that they put in place. And then the Eat Out to Help Out scheme in August. My gosh, we showed that businesses that have been forced to hibernate for 3.5 months could then come back and really roar into doing business, consumers going in and the economy starting to revive again. And now we've got these cases going up again. Whatever we do, we cannot have another national lockdown.
Right.
We've got to take the measures, but we've got to avoid a national lockdown as much as possible.
Torsten Bell, where do you stand between these opposing viewpoints?
Well, I don't think there's actually that much disagreement. Clearly, we need to see more restrictions on levels of interaction that gives us a sustainable footing, something that means that the level of caseload is not going up. But in general, this autumn we face two challenges. We need to prevent the virus caseload going up, and we need to prevent unemployment going up. And in the end, those two things are related, but those are two big tasks that the government faces and that they both need dealing with at the same time.
Well, Professor Sir Mark, what do you say to people who look at the figures for last month, for example, 4,000 dying from dementia, nearly the same dying from heart disease, coronavirus just over 1,000. Have we overreacted to the fatality of this?
No, unfortunately, I don't think we have overreacted. We know that the majority of the infections at the moment are in young adults who are pretty fortunate in that they're not terribly vulnerable to the worst effects of the disease. But if you look in other countries, if you look in Spain, they had a jump in over 600 new deaths last week. And we know that this will move into older and more vulnerable populations. It really is a case of being between a rock and a very hard place. And Torsten is fundamentally correct. I don't think there is any disagreement between us. The government has to steer this incredibly tight dividing line between losing complete control of the disease and managing to keep as much of the economy going as possible.
Lord Bilimoria,
and that really does depend on all of us.
Do you agree? Sorry, we have limited time. Do you agree that COVID is a real killer, frightening killer?
I agree with Sir Mark, who I have the hugest respect for. We're not disagreeing here at all. What I think really needs to be done, and this is where business can get together behind with government, is testing. We've got the testing at the moment, but what we need is mass testing. And the mass testing is already taking place in America. There's a company, Abbott Laboratories. They have a Binax test where in 15 minutes, you get to know whether you've got COVID or not. They're producing 10 million of those instant tests right now, 50 million next month. We should be getting behind at speed to produce those sort of tests here. If we can have mass testing twice a week, as far as possible across the country, then we will get on top of this until a vaccine comes. And hopefully a vaccine will come later this year, beginning of next year. But until then, We can have this mass testing. That's the way of keeping on top of this disease and allowing the economy to run full steam ahead.
So, Mark.
Well, so, I mean, again, there's no disagreement. The more people we are able to test and identify people who've got disease accurately, and the tests have really got to work well to do this, then that helps. And we need a mixture of national controls, but also local controls, workplace controls, where there's an outbreak, for example, in a food processing factory. We need the ability to have really good public health at a local level, coupled with a sort of baseline level of national control.
Torsten, whether there's a national lockdown or whatever restrictions there are, it's the low paid who are going to lose out. And that's the same with testing as well, where you've got people at Eton and bankers able to access private tests, not the rest of us.
Well, it's certainly true that this crisis has fallen hugely disproportionately on low earners to date. They are overwhelmingly more likely to have lost their jobs or been furloughed, and they have had to bear the brunt of the health risks because they tend to do work that can only be done face to face. But the key, the absolute key to this is to understand that we're not going to get to a situation of population-wide testing on the timeline that we would need to deal with this autumn. So we are talking about more restrictions coming in over the coming few months. And the danger is that we are bringing in those restrictions just as we are phasing out the support that we previously had in place for people and for firms. And we're going to need to think very hard about that. If people are going to be able to quarantine and we're going to ask them to help us save lives overall, then we have to save their livelihoods when they do it. And at the moment, we do have good support for some people if they have to quarantine, but not for 7 out of 8 workers. And that is not enough.
Lord Bilimoria, should the furlough scheme be extended?
Absolutely. By the way, the test I spoke about in America has been FDA approved and announced at the end of August. We're behind the curve here. We should be on that same page right now and encouraging, and I'm sure we can do it. But when it comes to extending the job retention scheme, absolutely. We at the CBI have said there should not be a cliff edge at the end of October. We need to have a form of extension of the job retention scheme, which has been fantastic in saving millions of jobs. We've tried to flatten the disease curve. We've also got to flatten the unemployment curve, because the worst thing that could happen would be to have unemployment staring us in the face down the road. We can avoid that. The Chancellor's been brilliant in doing whatever it takes. Well, we're going to have to do more, including other forms of support. The loan schemes need to be extended. They're coming to an end at the end of September and October. They need to be extended, and also delaying of taxes and more rates relief. Business will need that support.
Very briefly, Sir Mark, is this about fear and control? The government is trying to scare us into submission.
No, I don't think so at all. I think it is actually about protecting all of us as a population. And whilst I agree with Lord Bilimoria that testing is important, it's not the magic bullet. Probably about 30% of cases are asymptomatic.
Professor,
and, testing a population of over 60 million is going to be impossible.
Professor Sir Mark, Lord Bilimoria and Torsten Bell, thank you all very much for joining us.